Hello and welcome to this episode of Leadership Guest Practices. We'll be talking about positively impacting mental health and workforce wellness through a more equitable, diverse and inclusive workplace. It's true that empathy, leadership, EQ and the human touch have come front and centre through the pandemic and highlight the importance of enlightened leaders and people at all levels who model those traits. In some cases, equity, diversity and inclusion factors have indeed been positively impacted, but for many workplaces they remain an issue, particularly as we head to the new normal. To discuss this further, I'm joined by expert Kaumudi Goda, KG, who is the co-founder of the Inclusive Leaders Institute. She's a trained lawyer. She is also Diversity, Equity, Inclusion and Belonging Director for the Data Visualization Society and Senior Advisor for Human Capital and Sustainability in Business at the Indian School of Business. KG was recognised as a Business APAC Influential Women Leader of 2020 and features in publications such as the Financial Times, Asian Entrepreneur, the Times of India and the Hindu. She is an award-winning public speaker, executive coach, trainer, facilitator, best-selling author and advocate of a more equitable, diverse and inclusive workplace. Let's hear more. Hello and welcome to this episode of Leadership Guest Practices with Kaumudi Goda. KG, welcome. Thanks for joining me.
Hi, Jeremy. I'm so excited to be here with you. Thank you for having me.
It's a real pleasure and a topic which is of increasing importance as we head to the new normal and increasing unpredictability and uncertainty out there. So before we get into that topic though, let me give you the floor to introduce yourself, your expertise and your passion.
Jeremy, I'm the founder of The Human Conversation, co-founder of the Inclusive Leaders Institute and senior advisor for Human Capital SIG and Sustainability in Business SIG at the Indian School of Business. I am a lawyer by training. I worked for many years as an attorney at law in New York City, and right now, as I live in Singapore, I'm focused on looking at the world through the lens of sustainability and the intersection of law and public policy, business, and people. What I am passionate about is an inclusive green economy where we focus on the sustainability of human beings, the ecology, as well as businesses.
Wow, that is incredibly impressive and so diverse. And of course, I'm not surprised in many ways that you have this broader view of where we need to be. And it's true, actually, during the pandemic, you'll have seen this, I'm sure, that the companies that have done best have focused on those kind of elements like purpose, sustainability. They've looked at the mental health of their workforce in a little bit better. They understand the new equity, diversity and inclusion lenses that are out there. But before we get there, from your unique perspective, what are those critical equity, diversity and inclusion dimensions that are of most importance to either fix or accelerate that is going to benefit the workforce and potentially the world as we move forward?
You started off on the right note, I think, Jeremy, when you talked about the future being uncertain. That much we know for sure. I think it was Justin Trudeau who said something that's my current favorite quote, that the pace of change has never been as fast as this and will never again be this slow. And likely the one thing we can all be mentally prepared for is that change will continue to be more quick and more ever present. And therefore, I think if you look at holistically any of these wicked problems we have in the world, diversity and inclusion, poverty, healthcare, social justice, pluralism and democracy, all of these things that we feel are under siege, the fact that our planet is in ecological crisis, if you look at any of those, the underlying philosophy of what is likely the panacea is all of us overcoming our differences and our diverse identities, coming together as humanity and working together to thrive together, because in doing so is when we'll solve each other's problems. If I am hyper focused on my problem and you're focused on your problem, we'll never fix the overall problem that all of us are under. So uniting over diversity, overcoming that diversity and coming together, that perhaps is the philosophy that unites all of these wicked problems. And that's, I think, is the first thing we should look at. And the second one is, as much as we have this global vision, we then need to narrow down to local and customized solutions. You can talk about all the glorious policy. An avid student of public policy. We can write all the glorious policy we want. If it doesn't make sense for your local stakeholder, it's not going to take. For example, racism manifests as something very specific in the US. It will look very different in Australia. It will look very different in Indonesia. It will mean something very different in India. And we need to appreciate it and we need to tweak it. Therefore, global perhaps is something that we need to be very mindful about. Having a human centric, stakeholder centric solution and attitude towards all of this.
Well, I've been writing furiously as you've been as you've been talking here, because I'm learning a lot. Every time you speak, it's something else comes in, and I love the terminology that you use. Under siege. That's the planet, it's life, it's work, it's kind of all dimensions of humanity. So, in order to overcome those differences, which really seems to be the biggest thing to fix and to accelerate, is looking at these things together, enabling our humanity. In many ways, to use your terminology, and I like that approach, global, because it is not a fair platform in many ways. ED&I means something different in Africa than it does in the US, than it does in Indonesia, as you talked about. So absolutely, that's key. And of course, KG, you're a practitioner in this as well. So, if we then put the lens squarely on business here at the moment, what's the central question that organizations need to address to move the needle on ED&I?
For me, what I see on the ground is the business case for diversity and inclusion has been made resoundingly. There's scads of data available. Every website out there offers some statistics, offers some real percentages around how to initiate that conversation. In addition, more people now are considering themselves as tolerant, diverse, exposed to the world, and therefore, when you suggest to somebody they might work on their inclusivity, it offends their personal identity. You are violating how they see themselves. And that is essentially the problem, is we strive for perfection at all times. We demand our leaders to be omnipotent, omnipresent, omniscient, and we are so intolerant of imperfection. Cancel culture. The second the CEO makes an apology that sounds not so perfect, cancel the brand, cancel the president, he's out of his job or her job. So the intolerance culture, the essence of perfection that has completely permeated every layer of the corporate world, means that we see ourselves and hold ourselves to these values. All of this chaos, uncertainty means that we are making suboptimal decisions because we don't know very much. We can't admit we don't know it, but we better make decisions fast and sure, because I am a leader and I need to provide direction to all my confused workforces. So this means I'm making suboptimal decisions. I'm internalizing all of that stress. I can't admit I'm wrong. And this, therefore, is the biggest problem we have: inability to admit that there is a gap between knowing and doing. And if there was one thing organizations need to focus on, it is, yes, we have a business case. Yes, we have wonderful strategic vision. We have beautiful policies around inclusion. But these everyday decisions at every level of our organization, are we committed? Are we having courageous conversations? It's one thing to declare it's mental health wellness week, and in a team meeting, if you have a coworker who's languishing visibly for second week in a row, if I lean forward and, pardon my French, if I say, Jeremy, you look like shit, Are you going to feel comfortable owning the fact that in fact you do feel awful? Probably not. So that message of mental health wellness week, mental health week versus how I show up in my team meeting is there's a huge gap.
It's very interesting because I talk a lot about this myself around the fact that we're talking about the workforce and the mental health issues and wellness issues. We don't talk enough about leadership level. Our leaders are bombarded like they've never been bombarded before, managing not just the pandemic, but 10 years of transformation before it, a decade ahead that looks increasingly uncertain, and new skills, digital, all of these kind of things that are hitting them and their business. And you're right, it's leadership readiness is something that has come out of my research as well as a big gap out there. But it does then open up something that you said at the beginning, that perhaps actually there is a much greater opportunity now for humanity to be the glue within the organizations, having these open conversations. We know that there is the rise of human-centered leadership. We know also that there is a strong bottom-up approach in some organizations, a more collective approach to leadership and having conversations like this, which could be good news for those organizations that are doing it. And perhaps if we explore this human heart a little bit more, you mentioned kind of mental health and wellness. How do you think that these sort of equity, diversity, and inclusion dimensions now sort of interplay with this increasing human centered need and approach in some of our organizations when we consider things like mental health and whole person wellness, not just kind of the mental health? And how important are these aspects for an engaged, mobilized, motivated workforce and leader?
I think one thing is crystal clear through this pandemic period is all of us are practically in each other's living rooms. We are closer than ever. We are front and center, living our lives out in front of each other, and yet we are so different. You are sitting in a beautiful Cotswold cottage. I'm here in Singapore, and yet we are in a conversation with each other. Your weather, the time of day, the politics where you live is very different from where I am, which means that it can be a huge cognitive dissonance. That we are working on the same project, we're working in the same company under the same policies, but your reality is different from mine. And in a moment, I may not be able to understand that and show up for you immediately. And therefore, I need to work harder about being strategically empathetic. I may not understand exactly what you're going through, Jeremy, but I can take a moment and make an effort to truly ask and be empathetic when I do hear. So, for instance, if somebody were, let's take Naomi Osaka, for example. She's the famous tennis player. And she got in trouble recently because she said she was exhausted from intrusive press questions. And so during the tour she was doing of a famous circuit, she said, I'm mentally exhausted. I don't want to do the interviews. The organization responded very poorly. All that's fine. What's interesting is male tennis players withdrawing from competitions don't get as much flack as Naomi Osaka did. So, gender plays a role in how failure of superstars is received. The second layer then is that she's actually a person of color from Asia. So, being half black in Japan is likely adding another layer of stress in her existence. And then the third layer is that mental well being is still a source of stigma and discrimination. There is, of course, this 996 culture of you always work, high performance at any cost is something that's really important here for all of us in Asia. Prevalent culture, existing culture. So that's the thumbprint of the culture on my brain. So I feel I am responsible for always turning in my very best A game to you all the time, Jeremy. So whether you say anything or not, I'm already feeling stressed out that I need to show my best game to you, no matter how I'm feeling. And then if you respond slightly unsympathetically, There's so many layers of stress that you don't see, but I have. I'm a woman. I am a woman of color. I'm a woman of color battling mental well-being in a culture that is very intolerant. In fact, it's beyond stigma. In fact, it's discrimination. I may not get a job. I may not be able to date. My family members may be judged because they have a member of the family struggling with mental wellness. So all of this means that I'm staggering under an invisible burden that you don't see. You see an athlete at the height of her career at a very young age. Therefore, a small negligent comment from you dismissing whatever I'm going through might actually break me far beyond what you comprehend. Another thing is, you may have this conversation with me and walk away, and you can disengage. I cannot disengage from the invisible differences I have in my identity. I cannot stop being a woman. I cannot stop being a woman of color. I cannot stop being a woman of color with mental wellness issues who's residing in Asia. So I can never take that backpack of burden off, right? Those are some of the problems we should all be aware of in the workplace. So when Simone Biles says that I cannot continue in Tokyo Olympics because I'm feeling not right, the absolute scourge of derision that was piled up on her can't have helped somebody who's already so conscious as a person who, I bet the pressure on her is to be model minority, right? You are an Olympian, you're a star gymnast, you've got to be perfect, cheerful, upbeat all the time. The world's at your feet. What's the problem? Come on, cheer up. You can't say things like, I'm not feeling well. It's the Olympics. It's what you've slaved for 5 years. Come on. So these are sensitivities we can be more aware of in the workplace. Take a moment of grace, pause before you respond, recognize somebody's burdens might be invisible to you, but they still have it. Therefore, let's avoid toxic positivity. For starters, let's encourage courageous conversation. That means even if my discomfort is making you uncomfortable, stay with me anyway. Allow that to happen, that awkwardness to happen. That would be a great beginning.
So I'm curious, actually, if we can transpose this back to the workplace as well. Do you know of, I mean, particularly maybe in Asia as well, where these dimensions are still kind of front and center and not being tackled so well? Are there organizations doing this well, and what's the impact?
So that's a fantastic question, and it goes back to our conversation around global vision and local customization. And anytime we make a generalization, we will find immediately a dozen exceptions that prove that the generalization we just made is not true at all for them, right? So when we talk about stigma and discrimination around mental well-being and holistic human wellness, a conversation might be far more advanced in corporate America. Therefore, a multinational corporation having anonymous helplines, having rules around how to engage, how to be watchful for microaggressions. These might be prevalent in an MNC with offices all around the world. So while I'm in my American company celebrating Pride Week, I step out and I go right back into my closet because it is actually physically unsafe for me. It's a crime. My identity is a crime in the country I live in. And so that's one dissonance. The second one is not every organization and workplace is an MNC. Many times they're very hyper-local cultures where everyone feels, in fact, very much the cultural thumbprint on the brain. It's like a toxic cloud around us. I've grown up in this atmosphere. You may send me from the headquarters a policy around maternity leave, but I might have colleagues and peers who are totally judging about, oh my goodness, this woman is pregnant. I do not want her on my project because it's going to be one person less on this very high stress project. So not all things are equal, not all conversations are same, and every region, every organization will have its own ability to handle these courageous conversations and inability to even address it, or maybe unwillingness to address it. I've had clients who've confided in me that they suspect they might be on the autism spectrum, or they might be depressive, or so have severe anxiety, and they dare not go to mental services because these things are tracked and that might impact their health insurance, health coverage, it might impact their employment opportunities.
Yeah, I totally get it. I mean, we've got a long way to go, haven't we? In these but it's great what you said before, because I think the awareness and the fact that we're talking about it is there, and there are increasing best practices. In fact, what you just talked about there, that kind of neurodiverse, there is an increase of neurodiverse recruitment for very creative roles or data-driven roles. I think the team was at HP Enterprise in Australia did a measure, and they had a complete neurodiverse project team, and they were 30% more productive than any of their other teams within the organization. So there are more enlightened organizations and leaders who are looking into these, and that's just one of these lenses that we talked about. And there's you talked also about this intolerance of imperfection, which you mentioned before as well, and the need for greater empathy. If we truly do move that down, embrace our humanity, embrace more human-centered leadership, these kind of open conversations can start to happen more often and more common, even in maybe the small, medium businesses that are more local, because they're going to need to change if they're going to compete. Employees these days have more power, way more power in interviews. They're the ones making the choices in some cases now. How did that organization or that leader treat their employees during the pandemic? What is their policy on empowering me, or what is their track record of gender diversity at the top within the organizations? The only one thing that worries me, I have to say, and maybe you have a view on this, KG, is that with everything that's gone on with COVID-19, obviously some organizations are also facing just the fact that they need to survive. And therefore we go from macro level, we've got the climate crisis, the planet, right down to ED&I issues. We've got issues of our blended workforce, perhaps, which is increasing, and ways of working, the new normal, all of these kind of things. How can equity, diversity, and inclusion stay front and center in terms of corporate strategic priorities with all of this noise that is kind of reaching us now as we emerge from the pandemic?
So I'd love to take a step back, Jeremy, and run by something. Perhaps I wonder if you've heard of this. Have you heard of this one? Tell me if you did. Diversity is a fact of life. Equity is a mindful choice we make. Equity is recognizing that Jeremy has different needs, KG has different needs. Each need is to be respected, and for Jeremy to shine his brightest, we need to give Jeremy what he needs to shine his brightest, and we need to give KG whatever she needs for her to do so. So that's equity. And then there is inclusion, which is commitment, that we're going to make sure that everything we do, we bring in and leverage Jeremy's best skills and KG's best skills. That is inclusion. And when we have diversity in the organization, we mindfully choose to provide equitable solutions to each of our employees, and we commit courageously to inclusion. That's when the outcome is you and I both feel we belong to the same team. I wish you well. I don't see you as a burden on me. I don't see you as a competition. I see you as a brother. You shine, I shine, we shine together, and this is a brilliant organization for us to be. Therefore, belonging is an outcome. Have you heard of this one? It's by Arthur Chan.
I have heard of that one, and it's very interesting for me, because I think the word equity and being more equitable has made the biggest difference within this conversation, because I do believe actually you can be diverse and inclusive, but you're not necessarily being fair or equitable, if you like. You're not putting, maybe your inclusiveness can be lip service in some ways. We'll include you on the project team because you happen to be X, Y, or Z. But we might not give you the platform that we're giving everybody else, or hear your voice. So yeah, I totally get that, and I think it's a way, actually, as you're saying here, actually, it's a mindful choice at the end of it, and we have a platform for it.
And I think this is a beautiful way to actually look at many of the wicked problems we have today. So if you're thinking about sustainable development of our shareholders, our employees, our supply chain folks, our vendors, our customers, our future talent pool, the entire spectrum of all our stakeholders, when we consciously commit to ensuring everybody thrives, not just surviving, not just us using it up to leverage to our best advantages. We don't care what happens to the ecosystem we're surviving in, but we together always try to be equitable, inclusive, commit to inclusion, and therefore it results together in belongingness. That's when everyone does their very best. They feel safe to innovate, they feel safe to take risks, they feel safe with uncertainty and chaos. We're going to be okay because we're all in this together. And that's when actually new avenues open up for new creative solutions. We're actually expanding the pie. It's no longer a zero sum game, which means that as a middle manager, if I'm planning an event, Jeremy, for you, and I'm thinking, do I choose the 20-cent plastic folder or the $1 paper folder? And how about these uh, weavers in India who've been always supplying the fabric? Maybe I can reach out to them and find out if they can do some sustainable products for this meeting. I'm pleasing the stakeholders. I'm creating sustainability focused choices within the organization. And I feel safe to do so because even though I spent $1 instead of 20 cents, I know Jeremy is not going to reprimand me about it. I feel safe doing that. And what that results in is that we are actually going to be able to go to campuses and say we are a sustainability focused, purpose driven organization. Our vendors feel appreciated that we are making more mindful choices and we demand the same standards from them. And our employees feel they work every day at an organization that is committed genuinely, not a farce, not a lie that we sell to external stakeholders, but genuinely they're working with the good guys. Imagine what that will unlock. So, whether you're thinking about sustainability or inclusion or whole well being of organizations, holistically, all of these problems are about viewing it from stakeholder centric, equity and mutual respect based decisions. Always.
It sounds wonderful, and you paint the picture, of a very positive place where people are making the right mindful choices. So the $64,000 question for you is this. So for those people listening here said, yeah, I totally get it. I want to do something. I'm a leader or I'm an individual contributor who wants to make an impact. What are your kind of 2 or 3 tips here that can help them make progress in this area and impact kind of the whole company well-being and the way that it moves forward?
I think first and foremost is having a kinder internal work atmosphere. Now, bear with me, Jeremy. You're talking about $64,000 question, and I'm talking about feelings, and I recognize how it sounds. But start first of all with an a kinder internal climate. If I own my story, this is who I am. I'm an Indian national. I have an Indian accent. I went to certain schools. I have a certain perspective. I'm a lawyer. I'm risk averse. If I own all of these things that I feel are my weak points, and I am fair and honest and authentic about how I show up. Listen, what you're saying is triggering my thought because I'm going to be compliance focused. That's what I do for a living. I'm going to be compliance focused. Therefore, I am feeling completely comfortable in my own skin. Automatically, that makes me more tolerant of you. If I feel driven to portray a fake perfect image all the time, and I constantly experience imposter syndrome, I'm going to get caught for the fraud I am. Naturally, not only am I intolerant with myself, but that intolerance will filter through in how I show up in meetings with my employees as well, with my team members as well. So, kinder internal climate, owning and being comfortable with our own authenticity, meaning if I'm not feeling great, I'll share it. Google's brand new credo talks about that. Own it. If you're not feeling well, say it. Secondly, it's also about being strategically empathetic. I don't need to understand exactly what you're going through, but I can be present in that moment with you when you share it. Be respectful, recognize that just as all of my experiences, education, cultural background informs my worldview and how I respond to situation, Jeremy has his own. I don't need to agree with Jeremy, but I can respect his right to have those opinions and feelings in this moment. And the third one then is to step outside, to try at least to step outside our respective identities, our tribal identities, right? I'm a lawyer, you are a strategist. We're probably not going to always see eye to eye, but can we step out of those identities and have this conversation on what is the bigger picture here? Can we take a step back? Because I might have to give a little bit in this conversation and you might take, but because I built that relationship of respect, you trust me, and because there is trust, you will be far more willing to give a little next time. So respect builds trust, builds more ability to give and take. And finally, it is hard when we have an advantage, Jeremy. We feel we deserve it. We have these advantages because I have suffered so much in my life. This privilege I enjoy is my blood, sweat, and tears, and I deserve it. And hey, if you have a bum deal, you probably, well, you must have done something because of which you don't have it, right? Why should I give up my privilege? I actually had a conversation with a senior executive who was frustrated. He said, in his company, it's a small family business in Asia, the track from manager to one of the partners was 8 years. He said, you know, KG, how much I have had to put up with to survive in this small family business. I deserve that partnership. And now you're telling me you're crafting diversity inclusion policy. That means there are going to be new women candidates who get a shot at partnership right off the bat without the 8-year struggle. That's not fair. I deserve it. I've waited long enough. So when we enjoy privilege and we enjoy a particular pattern, a system or process, we don't feel like giving the advantage up. So then the last step in the picture I'm painting is around committing to doing the right thing and trusting that it will yield in rewards for everybody. That's the expanding the pie I'm talking about. So strategically speaking, if you're kinder to yourself and therefore more tolerant towards others, it leads to more courageous conversation and a belongingness that leads to innovation, which expands the pie. Because there is trust, there is a holistic lens, and we have expanded the pie, it means that it's no longer a zero-sum game and everybody yields richer results.
Some fantastic gold mined there, I have to say. And I do get that starting. For me, it's a mindset. It's about understanding how people are feeling, kindness. We've seen it actually come through in the very best organizations over the last 18 months, and they've thrived because of it. You know, there is proofing now behind what you're saying. So I totally get that. And those that have been either strategically or even operationally empathetic, being present in those moments, being courageous enough as a leader, let's say, to expose their own vulnerabilities, demonstrate compassion, talk about the human heart and the human center of the organization. You know, they're the ones that are really kind of finding a way forward that has been quite different to the past, and stepping outside of, you know, what my core identity might have been, particularly like the person that you just said. My identity is, I've been on 8 years of this track. I'm now a partner. I not only deserve it, but that's me. Yeah. And I think those that are ability to kind of step out of that, you know, making a big difference and looking at the whole, doing the right thing in the right way that benefits the whole, not just the one or the few. I think that's beautiful. And, you know, it's been a fascinating conversation, KG, and I really appreciate it. Some fantastic points that have come out of it. And I know that people will want to get in touch and carry on the conversation with you. So how do they engage with you following this? And we'll make sure that we put this for those watching on the screen.
You can find me on my website, thehumanconversation.com. I'm also active on LinkedIn. So that's Kaumudi Goda. That's my name. Jeremy, I've admired you for so long. I know I could talk for hours with you. So I'm particularly pleased we had this freewheeling conversation. Thank you so much for having me.
It's a real pleasure. And thank you for joining me and sharing this perspective on something that we perhaps don't talk enough about in some organizations, but thankfully some are now starting to put this on the agenda in the boardroom, as well as in the hallways and by the water coolers. Thanks, KG, for joining me.
Thanks, Jeremy. Bye.
Thank you for joining our Guest Practices videocast. Please do subscribe to our YouTube channel through the link below, or check out our website to access more in our current series of expert interviews.